All right, so now we're going to continue looking at factoring ax squared plus bx plus c. This is going to be part 2 or level 2 of factoring trinomials with a leading coefficient. So again, you do need to know how to find all factors for numbers, understand your rules for operations with signed numbers, and understand how to multiply binomials. All right, in this section, we're going to look at level 2, which is A or C is prime, but not both. So before we begin, or as we start these problems, the first thing you want to determine is which one is prime. And you can place that one in either your firsts or your lasts. Those are going to be set in stone because those ones you know there's no other way to factor it. From there, you want to look at the number that is composite. Determine numbers that multiply to it. Make sure, I would suggest listing out all the different ways to multiply to it. And then you want to try each pair twice. Remember in the last section we saw that sometimes we had to flip our numbers around. Same thing in this section. You want to do this until you reach the right answer. Now, as I said, I'm going to be talking about some of my rules that we want to use in order to help us discard any possibilities. From there, you want to determine where the signs go. Remember, if C is positive, then the signs are the same. They are the same as B, and it doesn't matter how you place them in there since they are the same. And if C is negative, then you do need to look at outsides and insides. The larger of the two products, outsides or insides, will have the same sign as B. Check by foiling. If it is wrong, then switch the numbers in step 2, redo step 3, and keep going from there. Okay, so let's go over our 3 rules of factoring according to the instructor, me. So we've talked about 2 of these already in the previous section. We have numbers with common factors cannot go in the same set. We'll explore this one a little bit more here as we have some more examples. Number 2, we haven't had a chance to look at this one yet, so we'll be looking at this in this section. Is the middle number even or odd? If it is even, then the factors for one of your numbers is 2 even numbers. An even plus an even is an even. If it is odd, then do not choose a factoring that is composed of 2 even numbers. Is the middle number large or small in reference to the first and last? This is a gray area as it's an opinion question. What you may consider to be a large number, I may consider to be a small number. It all depends on your point of view. So you have to be careful on this. Note though that it can narrow down the possibilities and can even help you determine where you want to place your numbers. Place your numbers so as to maximize or minimize the outsides and insides. All right, so let's look at some examples and see what we come up with. For some of these, I'm going to go ahead and continue doing some trial and error. Again, just so that we can go ahead and discuss some of the rules and why they work. So for example A, the first thing I want to do is determine which one is prime. Again, we like prime numbers in our factorings because there's only one way to factor it. So I note that the 2y squared, that is my prime, which means that my firsts are going to be 2y and y. Now I need to know what multiplies to 6. We have 1 and 6. We have 2 and 3. So now for this, let's see if we can rule out some of our options using some of the techniques that I've already talked about. For instance, I know that 1 and 6 is not going to work. 1, because I cannot put a 6 in this first factor, as 2 and 6 are both divisible by 2. Remember, we cannot have common factors in the same set. I also cannot I don't want to put the 6 over here because we're subtracting to 1, and multiplying those two numbers, 2 and 6, gets me to 12. That's nowhere near 1. If you aren't sure why, I encourage you to try it and see what kind of answers you get for your middle sign. But I'm going to go ahead and rule that one out. So let's go ahead and try 2 and 3. So if you don't recall, remember that this would be a bad factoring. We'll see why. I'll show you as we go ahead and try it. So I have that my signs are different, and I do want my larger quantity, which is my outsides, to be negative. So I'm going to put -3, and I'm going to make the 2 a positive. So if we go ahead and multiply this out, we get 2y squared. Outsides is -6y. Insides is +2y. And last is -6. If we combine our like terms, we get 2y squared minus 4y minus 6, which is not what we wanted. But more importantly, one thing to note here, every single one of these has a common factor of 2, which means I should have been able to factor it out from the beginning. As that's not the case, this is bad. Remember, do not put numbers with common factors in the same set. So let's flip our 2 and 3. Remember that whether you're doing this using trial and error or the rules, you do need to make sure that you do have to consider both possibilities as far as where your numbers gets placed, whether you do it on paper or in your head. Now this time, we do have our outsides, 2y times 2 is 4, is larger than our insides, 3 times y is 3y. So I'm going to make my 2 negative and my 3 positive. Remember that you need to make sure your quantity, the larger quantity, gets the sign, not just the larger number. Okay, so if we go ahead and multiply this out now, we get 2y squared minus 4y plus 3y minus 6. And now if I do combine my like terms, I see that yes, my middle term is minus y. And so this is the correct factoring. And we're done. Okay, let's look at example B now. Example B, the first thing I note is that 4 is not prime, but 3 is. And so even though it's a little different than what we usually do, I'm going to start with that. I'm going to place in my lasts. You don't always have to start with your firsts. You can sometimes start with your lasts. So I'm going to have my lasts are 3v and v. I also know that my signs, since this is +3, I know they're the same. I know they're both positive. I can go ahead and put those in here now because they are the same. Okay, so now what multiplies to 4? Well, things that multiply to 4 are 1 and 4, 2 and 2. So I'm going to start with 2 and 2. If we go 2w and 2w, let's see what happens. So here we get 4w squared plus 2w plus 6w plus 3v squared. And if we combine, we get these were supposed to be wv's, 8wv, which is wrong. Now, according to Sarah's rules, if you use them, I know that 2 and 2 is not going to work at all before I even start it. And the reason is because if we look at this middle term, it is odd, which means that I cannot have any pairs of even numbers be the factors for either of my numbers, for either the first or the last. So I know 2 and 2 doesn't work. So let's work with 1 and 4. Again, I'm going to go back to putting in my lasts. Now I want to work with 1 and 4. Do I want to multiply 3 and 4 together? No, because we're trying to get to 7. So that means that I do not want to put my 4w in my second set to multiply it by the 3v. I want it in the first set. So this is going to be 4w and w. Again, our signs are the same. They're both positive. And now if we go ahead and multiply this out, we get our 4w squared. Outsides, we get 4wv. Insides, we get 3wv. And lasts, we get 3v squared. And this does combine to 7wv, which means that this is the correct factorization. All right, that takes care of example A and B, so let's move on to a couple other ones. All right, example C, we have 2x squared plus 11x plus 12. So my firsts, this is my prime number, the 2. So I know my firsts are 2x and x. So let's look at 12. What are things that multiply to 12? Well, we have 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. So first off, I can rule out 2 and 6 for several reasons. One, since my middle number is 11, which is odd, I don't want to go with 2 evens. Also, neither one of these numbers can go in the same set of parentheses with the 2x. They have common factors. 2 and 2 have a common factor. 2 and 6 have a common factor. So we can go ahead and rule that one out. I can also rule out 1 and 12 because of rule number 1. 12 cannot go in with the 2x because you have common factors. And rule number 3, I don't want it over here because 2 times 12 is 24, which is nowhere near 11. So the only logical choice that we have in order to factor this is 3 and 4. Now the 4 cannot go in with the 2x. They have common factors. So I'm going to put the 4 in the second set and the 3 in the first set. In order to multiply to positive 12, they are both positive, or they have same signs, and in order to combine to a positive 11, they have to both be negative. So let's go ahead and check this now. We get 2x squared. Outsides, we have 8x. Insides, we have 3x. Lasts, we have 12. And it does happen that this does combine to 11x. And so we're done. We only needed one attempt on this problem. Okay, let's look at D. For D, we have 3x squared plus 22x minus 16. So my firsts, that is going to be my prime. I know it's 3x and x. For 16, what multiplies to 16? Well, we have 1 and 16. We have 2 and 8. We have 4 and 4. Note here, since my middle number is even, then I do want 2 even numbers. So I know 1 and 16 is not going to be a viable choice. Okay, so now let's see what we have left to work with. Does 4 and 4 work? Well, let's try it and see what happens. We have 4 and 4. We do have that they have different signs in order to get to -16. And I want my larger quantity to be positive. So which one is larger? Outsides 12 or insides 4? 12 is larger, so I'm going to make that positive, and the other one negative. So if we FOIL this, we get, for our first, 3x squared plus 12x for our outsides. Insides, minus 4 times x is minus 4x, and lasts, we get minus 16. And if we combine, we actually end up with 8x. So this was not a good possibility. If you pick a number that is, for instance, 4 and 4, two numbers that are close together or the same, what you're trying to do there is minimize it. But keep in mind here that we have 22 as our answer in the middle, which means that I'm actually trying to maximize, especially since I'm subtracting to 22. So 4 and 4 would not have been a good option to choose unless you're doing trial and error. So 2 and 8 is the only one that really makes sense. So let's see what we can do in order to put them in. Here, because again we are subtracting to 22, I want to maximize the possibility, which means I want to multiply 3 by the larger number. I want to multiply it by the 8, which means that 2 will have to go in with 3x. My larger quantity, which is 3x times 8, 24, is larger than 2. That is going to be the one that I want to be positive, and I want minus 2. So if we FOIL this, we get 3x squared. Outsides, 3x times 8 is 24x. Insides, minus 2 times x is minus 2x. And last, negative 2 times 8 is negative 16. So we end up with 3x squared plus 22x minus 16, which is what we wanted. So this is our correct factoring. Go ahead and try the following problems on your own. See if you can get them on the first take. Otherwise, again, keep trying until you get to what works.